Okay, today I'm going to show you how to sew a button on. You are going to need a piece of thread about 12 to 18 inches long. Make sure the end of it has a clean cut because you need to thread a hand needle with it. Once you thread your hand needle, you are going to cut that length in half by tying the ends together. So I have a loop just around, the needle marks the halfway point, and I'm going to tie the ends of my thread in a knot. This will provide an anchor for your button, and it needs to be at the end of the thread. I like to do 2 knots, one right on top of each other. Some people like to do one. Either is fine. Okay. So the first one that we're going to do, we are going to take our fabric and fold it in half. Most of the time when you see a button sewn on fabric, it is more than one layer. Just one layer will not be strong enough to hold your button. We're going to do a 4-hole button, and whenever you start, you are going to start by coming up from the back of the fabric. So I'm going to hold the button in place wherever that may be of where I'm going to put it. I'm going to come from the back of the fabric and up through one of the holes. So I'm going to make an X on my button. So I'm going to come up, I'm going to pull my thread all the way through till I feel that knot catch in the back. Now it's okay if there's a little thread tail right there. That's not going to make that big of a deal. We can cut that later. I'm going to go across making my X, and what I'm going to try and do is get my needle to go back into the fabric pretty close to the same place that it came out of. I don't want all my threads all over the place. I want to keep them in a central location. So I'm going to pull it through till it's nice and tight. I'm going to come back. I'm going to look where my thread went in the first time, and I'm going to try and repeat that same pattern. Going up and down the whole time, trying to get it through the same spot. You want to pull it tight so that it's firm, but you don't want it so tight that you can't lift up the button. Most buttons need a little bit of room for the other layer of fabric to go underneath it for whatever it may be buttoning. You're going to go up 3 or 4 times on each part of your X, making sure that it's tight, going back through. So you can see all of my stitches are kind of just centered around that knot. If I'm far away from it, I want to kind of just move placement of my needle to make sure that it comes into a different spot. Sometimes this happens where it gets a little too loose. Don't start stitching again until you've been able to pull that through to get it tight. Sometimes you just have to pull one of the individual threads from there to get it going. Now I'm going to move on to the next part of my X. I'm still going to be trying to come up and back through in about the same place. Sometimes it's a little tricky. Don't poke yourself. I don't want anybody bleeding on their fabric. Make sure you're coming up through the right holes. Back down through the same place. I'm going to come up one more time through my X. Okay, so normally people would think they just tie it in a knot and they're done, but that's not the case. What you need to do is come through your fabric one more time, but not through the button. You're going to come up underneath the button. Pull your thread out, and we're going to do what's called a shank. So this little space that we've created underneath the button, we want it to stand up a little bit more. So we're going to take our remaining thread and we're going to wrap it around the button 3 times. If you're really feeling funky, you can do 4. And then we're going to send our needle to the back of the fabric, again coming out through about that same place. Now at this end, you can take your thread. I like to just cut it loose from the needle, give yourself a little bit of a tail, and just tie it like a shoelace into a knot twice. Didn't get it. And then any thread tails that you have, you can just cut them short. And that's how you do a button. All right, so you saw how to sew on a sew through button where you actually have the thread going through the middle of the button. We saw this example where all the threads are relatively in the same spot. Now we're going to do a button that has a shank already onto it. So this is something that's already on the button to help it kind of stand up away from the fabric, so that when it fastens, it already gives the room for the other piece to go through. I've already prepared my needle. I've doubled my thread on it and tied the end into a knot to be my anchor from the back. So as we start all buttons, come from the back of your fabric. We've got it double layered. Sometimes we go multiple layers, but at least 2 is what we want. Always want to make sure there's no little loops or anything, so if you see that, you got to just make sure that it gets pulled tight. Okay, so now that we're on the front of our button, it's very similar to how we did the sew through. You just thread it through the shank, and you're going back through just about the same hole, maybe a couple of threads of the fabric away from where you went in. So as we sew this, it's already going to stand up on its own, and that's what we're kind of looking for. You're going to be coming up and down through the button about 3 or 4 times, all trying to make it about the same location. We don't want a whole bunch of different stitch lines on the back showing that we're all over the place. Come back up through that button shank and back down. So normally we would come back to the front of the button and we would wrap the thread around it, but with the shank already built onto that, that's what we did with this other one. We kind of built it up a little bit. We can just tie it off from the back. Don't cut off your thread tails too short until you know that it is secure. Separate these threads. There we go. And tie them in a knot. All right, once I know that that's nice and tight in there, I'm going to trim off any extra threads. Make it so my project's not quite so hairy. And ta-da! So you need to do one of each type of button to really get a feel for it.